By the way, let me start with a quick question to the people on the floor, the audience. Okay, pay attention. Be aware that I'm a psychologist myself. So, okay. Think about your personality today and think about your personality yesterday. Are they the same? Yes, my personality today and yesterday, they are the same. Raise your hands, please. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't think so. My personality today and my personality yesterday, they are not the same. They are not the same. Raise your hands. You should be very careful because I'm doing a very critical diagnosis of your mental disease. Yeah. There is a right answer, of course. I'm sorry, but for the people who raise a hand for the second thing, your personality yesterday and today, they are not different. They are not the same. Then you should be very careful. You shouldn't be here. You should be in a hospital because you might have a multi-personality disorder. Okay. Sort of a joke, but it's very, very critically true. Your personality never changes. That is a psychologist's view. A sort of exaggeration, never changes. It changes over a long period of time, maybe 10 years, 20 years, but it never changes over a single day. Same thing for the organizational culture. Okay? So, corporate culture doesn't change over a single day, but they do have a lot of inflow of young people recently. And the speed of their change in terms of the culture is not accommodating the speed of the inflow of young people to their own organizations. That's why we are here. That's why we would like to have some learning from best practices that we have on board right here. Okay. So let me start with a quick question to the people on stage. What are some, Melissa first, okay? What are some differences that younger generations, such as millennials and what's so-called Generation Z people want from their own organizations? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I do think culture changes. I think culture is more of a verb than a noun. So there's that. We're going to start off being provocative. I think culture is something that evolves with the organization, and it's closely tied to purpose and strategy. And I think that for the MZ generation, and really for all generations, but in particular this generation, I think it's really important that they understand what the culture is. You know, what are those behaviors that make up the culture, and how do I ideally exemplify them? I think it's important that they're understanding and have clarity on what the strategy is and what they individually do to impact that strategy. And I think the purpose is really important too. In fact, I think has become even more important over the last couple of years. That why I'm here and why my company does what it does. That connection is really important. So I think being able to connect who I am as a person to how we work, why we're doing what we're doing, and what we're doing is really important.
So, according to the research done by Center for Generation Kinetics in the United States, millennials or Generation Z want mainly three things from their organization. Number one priority is career development and the impact of the organization to the society and the identification with the organizations. And interesting thing is, a lot of people misunderstand younger generation want people a lot more than older ones from the organizations, but there was no money issue among the three top priority issues. So that is very consistent with what Melissa mentioned. Okay. By the way, I strongly agree with what Melissa said, which is organizational culture changes, but not in an easier way than many people would think. Okay, and there are many different components of organizational culture. Some of them are visible, and some of them are not visible, such as buildings and symbols. Okay, they are very much visible, and behaviors still visible, but a little less visible than other organizational structures, buildings, or whatever. And then the shared values among employees, and then shared assumption and philosophy among workers in that organization. So we do have different layers in terms of visibilities. An interesting thing is when it comes to the change in organization, we want everything to change from the visible and to the invisible things. But interesting thing is that the invisible parts are really, really difficult to change because your thought and ideology and mindset doesn't change easily in the same way that organizational change. At Google, in terms of the large flow of a young generation people over the maybe recent years, maybe 10 years or so, even though you do have roughly 2 years work experience with Google,
Right.
Director APAC. Please.
Well, great. I mean, Google's 24 years old. I have a 24-year-old son, okay? So I've kind of tracked Google from 1998, kind of like I did my son from 1997, right? They're about the same age. And Google has had a wonderful maturing over those 24 years. But what's interesting for us is that the mission of Google hasn't changed. So the mission is to organize the world's information to make it universally accessible and useful. That hasn't changed in 24 years. Now remember, we started off primarily as a search company, right? We've gone far beyond that today with all the services and the products that we have developed. The other thing that's really important, we talked about, feeling connected to the organization. We've got our mission, which hasn't changed, and we also have our values. And our values are wrapped up in what we call the 3 R's, the 3 respects. So respect the user, so the people that use our products around the world. Respect the opportunity, because everything that we look towards in terms of our innovation, our collaboration, the uniqueness of the next big thing that will come up requires us to respect that opportunity. And lastly, it's about respecting each other. That for me, as a non-Gen Z or a millennial, for those of you who couldn't guess, still resonates. And the reason why I'm thrilled at what I get to do is because I work in a company where my value set is married to that of the company and vice versa. And I've always tried to do that in my career. I've tried to work in organizations that are changing the world in a good way. I couldn't work for other industries that I have a personal issue with. But I look at where we are today, and I think that connection, that hook, it's an emotional hook as well. Because if I feel like I belong to an organization, I'm going to give back more, so my discretionary effort is much higher. And so I think from a cultural perspective, what we've done is we've gone from 2 chaps working in a garage in California to nearly 200,000 people around the world. And that mission and that vision hasn't changed. So I think that's been the core of our culture, and it's only gotten stronger, right? So it hasn't necessarily changed. It's maintained itself as we've gotten older and we've gotten more mature as a company.
Your title is a director in APAC for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
And that was relatively new to me because whenever I have some business card, name cards from the officers that are in charge of diversity and inclusion and those kind of things, their title is officer in D&I,
Yes.
diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you have another one, equity.
Yes.
Did you know that equity is one of the most preferred standard of fairness by young people?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's incredibly important. You can have You can have a diverse organization, you can have an inclusive organization, but unless you apply equity to your population, you have disparity in opportunity, right? So the difference, you know, this is your sort of area of expertise, but if I may, oftentimes we confuse equity and equality, right? Equality would be the three of us get a bicycle each, off you go.
All right.
But if you're really tall, I'm really short, and you're a wheelchair user, 3 identical bicycles won't give us the same opportunity. So your bicycle, Melissa, needs to be tall. Mine needs to be short, and yours needs to be adjusted for your use. And so then that's an equitable sharing of that same bicycle. And I think it's really important for us to understand that equity levels that playing field for people. The other thing that's missing from my business card, and I think is really, really important, maybe we can dive into this a little bit later, is this concept of belonging. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion should equal a sense of belonging, which is a primal human need. It transcends culture, it transcends language, it transcends faith. It's what we as a species require, that sense of belonging to something bigger. And I think that's the one thing that excites me most about the work I get to do.
When it comes to fairness issue, probably some of you on the floor read the book titled Justice by Michael Sandel from Harvard University, right? Anybody read that book? Justice? You did? Did you finish the book? Did you finish reading it? Yeah, I know a lot of people who claim I read the book, but I have nobody who finished the book because it's really difficult. Why is it difficult? He doesn't tell us what justice is all about. Instead, he offers a lot of illustrations and he let us think about what is just and fair. And when it comes to justice and fairness, we usually come up with 4 different major standards. One is equity, another one is equality, and the third one is need, and the fourth one is seniority. And you probably understand what all 4 different fairness standards means. Equity, you get compensated based on your contribution. And equality, regardless of your contribution, you deserve just 1 unit, which is pretty much the same thing as others deserve. Okay? And need-based is depending on your needs. Some people are more in need, and some other people are less in need. So what Roman described when it comes to equity in the context of Google is a sort of combination of equity and need-based, I believe. And seniority, older people deserve more. And according to the research results by the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations in Korea, more than 60% of your monthly paycheck is accounted for by seniority. Okay, so that is a little sad. I believe your company is the youngest one out of those 3. Is that right?
Yeah, less than 10 years.
Okay. Can you please
7
tell
years.
us about your own company and some kind of expectations in terms of the culture that you can accommodate young people particularly?
Yeah, so the company is, I guess, too young to talk about cultural shift or how it has trended. But I think it's a very interesting one because it's predominantly younger generations who are at work. So just quickly, we have close to 600 people, and over 90% are what we call in the Millennials and Gen Z. So that's quite a bit. So I'm an outlier there. Within those 90%, less than 10% of the people are married with kids. Less than 10% of the MZ generations. And so we've been talking about the cultural shift and how people want equity now and how they want the belonging. And I think it's important to discuss demographic shift when we talk about the changes in corporate culture. It's not the only factor, obviously. But what we have here is, unlike in our past generation, you don't necessarily just work to meet the ends meet, right? So people like to feel you said belonging, and you said purpose. It could be recognition, it could be dignity. They need to feel that they are doing something right for the society. The company is a positive impact to the society. But why do people now care about it more than people in the earlier generation? Why is that? And my kind of answer to that is because they can afford to, right? So, you don't necessarily have to work to support your families, to feed yourself. So I think that leads to a lot of changes in the culture, which makes people like to enjoy their life more, live their life more, which is quite different from the previous generations and a lot of companies that are more demographically, in a demographic terms, older and more, let's say, family-oriented or domestic.
Can I just add to that? I think that what we're talking about a little bit here is that the contract has changed between the employer and the employee. And so a lot of the things that this MZ generation wants are actually things that we were just talking about we all wanted early on. We might not have voiced them as much as this generation, but I wanted flexibility. I wanted to be part of a company that had a purpose. And one thing that I'd love to talk about more, given I'm a chief learning officer at a learning company that does online learning, development is one of the number one things that employees look for, as you said. Mm-hmm. So I think that is really key, and that's probably the biggest difference that I've seen between generations is I always assumed and wanted to grow, but this is an active ask of the younger generation. Even in interviews, they're asking how much will I be able to grow, what skills will I be able to learn, how much will you support me in learning and development. And if they don't see that, even within the first year, mm-hmm. I think they will leave. Yeah. So I think that's a huge difference with this generation.
So other than, let's say I talked about demographics, so what do you think the reason for that is? It's not like we didn't like to. I like to learn. You like to learn. Everybody likes to learn, but we didn't put that much focus on or emphasis on. Can I grow at this company? Can I, what are you going to offer me to advance my career and to make me feel good about working here? We want that, forthcoming or aggressive about, if aggressive is the right word. So I'm curious, why the change?
Can I add to that though? I think what's interesting is when we all started our careers, I know certainly when I did, the people that I worked with who were from an older generation looked at me like I was from Gen Z or, a millennial. I was that new generation coming into the workforce. But I think the biggest difference that I've seen from when I started my career 30 years ago to where we are today was the prevalence of learning. It's available now. Back when I started my career, to be sent on a conference or a course, that was a big deal. You had to be in the top percentile of performers to be tapped on the shoulder, to be developed. Today, we have, things on our mobile phone. We can do mobile learning in a taxi cab. We can get some of the world's best education at the click of a button. We are surrounded by learning opportunities, and I think that's the difference. If I look back 30 years ago, the reason why I didn't ask for it because it didn't exist in the same way it does today.
I think that's a great point, Roman. I think it did, to your earlier point, but as one-off trainings. So it did occur like, it's one more thing for me to do, or I have to do this because my boss mandated it.
That's right.
Versus I think the the forward-looking companies now, modern workplace, are realizing that I need to actually build skills, not just for the organization, but to help that individual learn in their job and in their career.
That's right.
So it occurs more as part of my job and part of my journey towards success versus one more thing to do.
An interesting thing is people leave their organizations for mainly two reasons. One, pushing effect. They don't like each other. Supervisor doesn't like the employee. Employee doesn't like the supervisor either. So they are pushing each other. That's a pushing effect. Another force is a pulling effect. Outside the organization, you are a wonderful employee in the current organizations, and you are more visible in an external world. And other companies such as Good Choice, Udemy, and Google, they are pulling you out. That's why you are leaving. And previously, in the eyes of most employees in Korea, it used to be viewed as a betrayal, right? And no longer true. And this type of idea was picked up about 7-8 years ago in Korea, and more than 15 years ago in the United States. Okay, so that is a big change in terms of a psychological contract. And my contract, probably in writing, doesn't change much, but my contract with my employer in terms of a psychological contract has changed dramatically. Do you see this type of a change in younger generations in your company, Myung-hoon?
Yeah, absolutely. So I myself, I moved every 3-4 years. So there's nothing surprising here. If someone were to, okay, I'm gonna move after 3 years, I'm gonna move after 4 years. I wish you good luck. I hope your career really flourish. There's no hard feeling at all. I mean, that's kind of absurd to feel that a high performer is, for the organization, is unfortunate. But you have to, if you really care, if you really believed honestly that you cared about your employee, then you should be happy about that person's career advance if you believe that is a good opportunity. So I think in the idea of company taking care of the employees for a very long term, we like a family, it's a betrayal if you leave the company that's long dead, like 20 years dead. So yeah, for us, for sure.
Okay.
I think the days of, one company, one career are long over. I mean, I look at my father-in-law, bless him, he's 83 years old. He worked at the Prudential for 40 odd years. My own father was a calculus professor for 52 years. And that's all they did. And there's no disrespect there. That's fantastic. They had a sense of purpose in the work that they did. But I think what I'd add to what you just said is great. People do leave every 3, 4, 5 years because they have optionality. But do you know one of the best compliments a company can also receive is when your ex-employees come back to you. And that happens probably more than we give it credit
absolutely.
for, right?
Yeah.
Because people leave a good culture, they leave a great manager, but more importantly, a good culture. Because oftentimes people leave a lousy manager, not a company, right? But if they come back and they're welcomed back with open arms, they see the difference. And the old adage that, the grass is greener on the other side, I've always told leaving employees, I'm behind you, I'm supportive. We don't want to lose you, but you know what? This is your decision, and I'm supportive of that. I would never stand in your way, but you're always welcome back.
And I think it's great when they come back, for the person himself or herself.
Yes.
Because they would have grown professionally and seen a very different environment from what that person was used to. And for the company too, because now we're dealing with a much more mature
It's a double
person.
win.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm absolutely with you on this. Yeah.
So I believe, well, let's say you do have a lot of HR expertise, from the HR perspective, which one do you prefer? The new hires with a lot of lines on his or her resume, and just one single line, one or two lines in a resume, and very loyal to the company that he or she belongs to. Which one do you prefer?
Can I do an and? Not an either or. I used to, and this is how things have changed. I used to look at resumes, and the candidates who jumped, every year or two, I would be biased against them because I thought that they weren't able to be part of a team for longer than a year or so. I don't think that anymore. Now I look at resumes like that, and in particular, if somebody was at a company for a couple of years and in that time they were able to move around or move up, that's huge because it showed that the company had confidence in them. I think that if you stayed at a company for a while, it's important to me to know that you've grown, even if it's in the same job. But most likely, I was at Adobe for almost 11 years, which sounds crazy, but I had 5 different roles while I was there. So I look for that as well. So I think there's nuances to both of those cases.
Okay, well, I see.
May I add to that? I mean, when I look at, when I interview candidates, I love seeing those gaps because there's a story in that gap. And oftentimes, if you invite people to tell their story about, well, this is why I didn't have a contiguous career, there's often something that's really inspiring in that, whether they stopped to start a family or stopped to go and volunteer. There's always something to educate themselves, whatever it may be. There's, I think it's short-sighted for any hiring manager to just see, well, continuation equals loyalty, therefore I want you over somebody that looks like it's a perception that they bounce around and that they're unable to somehow keep a job. In fact, I find that fascinating, and making it okay to talk about it is very, very important. So the environment you create as an organization or as a hiring manager needs to be one where there's psychological safety so people can feel like they can tell you why they've taken a break. I actually think that it adds to the magic.
That's a good point, Roman. I've noticed recently in the last year or two that more and more people on LinkedIn have on sabbatical as their next job for a while. And I don't think you would have seen that even 3 years ago.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's not considered bad anymore, which I think is great. Yeah. So for us too, unless you have 7 different jobs in the last 3 years, that's a little extreme.
Yeah, that's different.
But
You know what? Even that, there's a story behind that too, right? And it could be that
May not be the story you want, but it could be a story.
True, but I think I find that fascinating. I love to have that conversation with people and go like, tell me if you're good enough to put it out there and say this is honestly my career path, to date. Tell me the story behind it. I'm fascinated by that.
I mean, we have multiple cases of people who. So I looked at the resume, worked for a company for a few years, quit, did a startup.
Yep.
It was a flop.
Yep.
And then you did another startup, again flopped.
Yep.
And then you join a company, you realize it's not for you,
Yep.
and then they come to us.
Yep.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yep.
And I actually like that because we are a smallish firm, so we want people who are ready to challenge and who like to challenge as opposed to being, just comfortable with where they are.